The galaxy was on fire. Once proud empires, brilliant civilizations, and untold star systems lay in ruin. The Drakthar, a ruthless and ancient species, had risen from the ashes of their own extinction to conquer all in their path. Their technological might was beyond comprehension, planet-killing warships, armies of genetically enhanced warriors, and a cruel, hierarchical military system that crushed all resistance beneath their boot. The Sihir, once the galaxy's unquestioned masters, had become a shadow of their former selves. For centuries, they had ruled the stars with advanced weaponry, a military that was feared by every race in existence. Their fleets were unmatched, their strategies perfect, until the Drakthar arrived. The Sihir fought valiantly, but no one was prepared for the Drakthar's relentless, no-holds-barred approach to war. Within a few short years, entire Sihir colonies fell, their fleets annihilated, their resources stripped away. The Drakthar didn't just conquer. They hunted, they enslaved, and they left nothing but ashes in their wake. On the Sihir homeworld, once a bustling hub of advanced technology and culture, the ruling council sat in a high-tech command chamber, their faces drawn with desperation. The holographic map before them showed nothing but red blips, their forces scattered, their remaining planets in jeopardy. They were losing. The Drakthar were everywhere, their war machines almost indestructible, their strategies unpredictable. For the first time in centuries, the Sihir Empire was on the brink of annihilation. "They will not stop until we are gone," High Commander Tarax of the Sihir muttered, his voice low and grim. "Our fleets have been crushed. Our cities burned. There is nothing left but our will to survive, and even that is fading." The council chamber was silent. No one dared to speak. They were too far gone, too broken. It wasn't just their people they were worried about. It was the galaxy itself. The Drakthar were a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. If they succeeded in wiping out this Sihir, they would be unstoppable. No one else in the galaxy stood a chance. "We have no choice," said Vorn, an advisor with deep-set eyes and a face etched with age. "There is one species, the humans. We feared them for centuries, but now we have no other option. They are our last hope." Tarax's eyes narrowed. "Humans? You suggest we beg them for help?" Vorn nodded solemnly. "We have tried every other possibility. The humans are unpredictable, but they have a reputation. They are the only species we know of that has survived against overwhelming odds. They are warriors, even if we have never fully understood their methods. If anyone can turn the tide, it is them." The very thought of contacting humans disgusted many of the Sihir leaders. The humans were so different, smaller, weaker, their history a chaotic blend of constant warfare, political strife, and unexpected victories. They had no true empire to speak of, no advanced galactic dominion, and yet their name had become synonymous with survival, with overcoming impossible odds. No one truly understood how they did it, but the fear they instilled in the hearts of their enemies was real. The Drakthar themselves, despite their seemingly superior forces, avoided direct confrontation with humans at all costs. Tarax stood up, his massive form casting a shadow over the chamber. "I will contact them. If they are as powerful as their reputation suggests, we must make them see our plight, and we will do whatever it takes to earn their trust, no matter how humiliating it may be." The council murmured in agreement, though it was clear that none of them were truly certain. Sending a message to Earth, to the humans, was a gamble, but it was the only gamble they had left. As Tarax turned away from the council, he knew that the Sihir's future, and perhaps the future of the entire galaxy, rested on the outcome of one fateful decision. They had no other options left. If humanity refused to help, the galaxy might soon fall into darkness. The decision was made. Despite the deep discomfort felt by many in the Sihir leadership, High Commander Tarax authorized the contact. An emissary ship was dispatched, carrying a desperate plea to Earth, the cradle of humanity, a world whose reputation across the stars had been solidified by whispered tales of their unpredictable brilliance in battle. The Skar had long viewed humanity with a mixture of disdain and fear, dismissing them as primitive, chaotic, and unworthy of their attention. But now, those same traits, humans' grit, adaptability, and fierce independence, seemed like the very qualities needed to turn the tide of war. Back on Earth, things were far from simple. As the Skar transmission reached human communications channels, the world went into a frenzy. The news spread like wildfire. Humanity, long a silent player in galactic affairs, was now being asked to take center stage in a war that threatened to consume everything. In the war rooms of Earth's Central Command, President Alicia Hawthorne and her inner council deliberated on the request. The gravity of the situation was palpable. Yet, even with the threat looming in the galaxy, a part of Earth's leadership hesitated. What do we owe them? General Samuel Wright, an old and seasoned war strategist, asked bluntly. We've managed to avoid the mess of intergalactic politics, kept to ourselves. This isn't our war. The room grew tense, the weight of centuries of isolation on Earth pushing back against the idea of getting involved in the chaos of the galaxy. But Hawthorne, a woman who had learned to make tough decisions, cut through the silence. We owe nothing to anyone, she said firmly, leaning forward. But they've attacked our colonies. The Drakthar have their sights on us now, too. And if we don't act, we may not survive the next few years. Her words struck hard, reverberating with the stark reality of the situation. Earth had always prided itself on maintaining neutrality, but the Drakthar had already begun testing humanity's defenses. A few skirmishes in the outer colonies had resulted in serious casualties. The last thing Earth needed was a galaxy-wide war spilling over into their home systems. The real question is, President Hawthorne continued, can we trust them? We know very little about the Skar, and frankly, I'm not thrilled with the idea of working alongside a species that has a history of manipulating those weaker than them. Her words weren't without merit. The Skar had been known for their imperialistic tendencies, and their history of subjugating weaker species was legendary. The idea of aligning with them left many feeling uneasy. Humanity had always struggled against oppressors. Could they, in good conscience, join forces with a race so steeped in conquest? There's no guarantee that they won't turn on us once we've helped them, argued one advisor, his voice tinged with concern. This could be nothing more than a trap. But a quiet voice interrupted. It was Dr. Lauren Hayes, the chief diplomatic officer. There's more at stake than just our colonies or the fate of Earth, she said. The Drakthar are a threat to the entire galaxy. If they succeed in wiping out the Skar, what's stopping them from turning to the rest of us? We may not be able to trust the Skar, but we know one thing. They are our best shot at surviving this. If we don't act, there will be nothing left to protect. Her words resonated. The Drakthar were a force too dangerous to ignore. Even the most powerful races had fallen before them. Humanity had to face the harsh truth. They could either act now and ally with the Skar, or stand back and watch the galaxy burn. After a long silence, the room finally came to a decision. The humans would intervene. Prepare the fleet, President Hawthorne ordered, her voice steely. We're going to meet them on their terms, but make no mistake, we'll be watching every step of this alliance. We don't need their approval. We need them to know that we're not some pawn to be used. A wave of unease rippled through the council, but also a sense of determination. Humanity had never been one to follow. It was time to show the galaxy that Earth wasn't just a home to the weak and insignificant. It was a force to be reckoned with. The message was sent. Humanity had agreed to help, but they would do it on their terms. A contingent of Earth's elite expeditionary force, EEEF, the best of the best, known for their unorthodox methods and brutal efficiency, was prepared to meet this Skar delegation in person. The war for the galaxy had begun. But this time, humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to prove their place among the stars. The atmosphere aboard the human fleet was heavy with anticipation. The Scare emissary ship had already entered Earth's orbit, but the humans had their own preparations to make. The political and military leaders were in constant communication, finalizing the terms of their alliance with this Scare. But the real work, the real challenge, would begin when the humans met the Scare in person. Captain Olivia Jackson stood on the bridge of the Endurance, Earth's flagship, as her crew executed the final approach to this Scare fleet. The tension was palpable. As a veteran of countless missions, Jackson knew how to manage her nerves. But this was different. The stakes were higher. The Scare were no mere alien empire. They were an ancient, once unstoppable force that had only now been brought to the brink of extinction, and humanity was their last hope. Jackson crossed her arms and studied the holographic display in front of her. The Scare ships, massive, hulking structures, brimming with weaponry and shields, lined up in the distance. Their sheer size was intimidating. Their reputation for brutal, efficient combat was legendary. To a race like this Scare, the humans must have seemed like an anomaly. Small, unpredictable, and capable of creating chaos out of nothing. "The Scare fleet is hailing us, Captain," Lieutenant Torres said from the comm station, snapping Jackson out of her thoughts. "Put it through," Jackson ordered. A flicker of light and a low hum filled the room before a hologram of Tarax, the Scare High Commander, appeared in front of them. His towering figure was imposing, his face a mask of calculated neutrality. Unlike the humans, his species was unflinching in the face of adversity. His eyes, though, betrayed a flicker of uncertainty, a weakness he likely wasn't used to showing. "Captain Jackson," Tarax said, his voice deep and resonant, "I trust you are prepared to assist in the defense of the galaxy." "I didn't sign up for this just to assist, Tarax," Jackson replied, her voice sharp. "We're in this together. Earth's fleet will be at the forefront of your war, but we'll be calling the shots." Tarax hesitated. "You have our respect, human. But our tactics are different, I know." Jackson cut him off. "I don't expect you to abandon your way of fighting. But the Drakthar don't fight like anything you've faced before. You need to think less about brute force and more about disruption. Chaos is our specialty." Tarax's brow furrowed. "Chaos. You plan to bring disorder to our forces." "Disorder for the enemy," Jackson said firmly, meeting the alien's gaze. "You've been fighting them head-on, thinking they'll fold like every other foe. But they're not like you. They adapt faster, fight harder. We'll use their own unpredictability against them." The Scare commander was silent for a moment, his alien mind clearly processing the idea. The Scare had long prided themselves on their discipline and control. The concept of chaos, of controlled disarray, was foreign to them. But Tarax's desperation was clear. If he was going to survive, if his people had any chance of enduring, he needed to at least try something different. "Very well, Captain Jackson," Tarax said after a long pause. "We will follow your lead, but understand this. We will not abandon our methods entirely. We will fight as we have always fought." "I wouldn't expect you to," Jackson responded with a slight grin. "But we'll need to make adjustments, quickly. Let's start with your fleets. I need to know everything about your forces, your resources. We're going to get you back on your feet before the Drakthar strike again." As the hologram flickered out, Jackson turned to her crew. "Prepare for the briefing. We're going to show this Scare what humanity is capable of." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. The Scare shared their most sensitive intelligence, giving Earth's military strategists a detailed view of their tactics, technology, and weaknesses. It quickly became apparent that the Scare had advanced technology, but it was also rigid, designed for an era of total dominance. The Drakthar, however, had learned to exploit these weaknesses with ruthless precision. Jackson's team went to work, devising strategies that would leverage the Scare's strength while introducing human ingenuity. The first mission would be a joint operation to disrupt a Drakthar convoy that was supplying one of their key battlefronts. The Drakthar were known for their strategic superiority, and if the humans could find a way to hit them where it hurt, without this Skur's usual full-scale assault, it might just throw them off balance. The operation was high risk. The Skr wanted to crush the convoy with overwhelming force. Jackson knew that the best approach was precision, speed, and hitting them in a way they didn't expect. It was time to test whether the Skur's pride and the humans' chaotic brilliance could truly come together. The operation to disrupt the Drakthar convoy was set into motion under the cover of darkness. Captain Olivia Jackson stood on the Bridge of Endurance, her eyes scanning the glowing holographic map of the galaxy. The Drakthar convoy was on a predictable path, transporting vital supplies to one of their fortified staging areas. The mission was deceptively simple: intercept, destroy, and retreat before the Drakthar could mobilize a counterattack. But with the Skur's traditional tactics of overwhelming force, Jackson knew it wasn't going to be that easy. "This is going to be a test of everything we've been training for," Jackson said, her voice cold and resolute. She looked over at Trax, who stood beside her, silently studying the tactical display. The Skur had agreed to follow the human plan, but there was no doubt in her mind that his people still didn't understand the subtleties of their approach. "We strike fast," she continued, glancing at her officers. "No full-scale assault. We hit them where they least expected and vanish before they can retaliate." Trax's deep voice rumbled in agreement, though he clearly didn't like the idea of retreating before delivering a killing blow. "I have commanded battles for centuries, Captain Jackson. This method is unorthodox, but I will follow your lead." "Good," Jackson replied curtly. "Let's make sure we make it count." The human and Skr fleets moved into position, cloaked by the darkness of space, their ships camouflaged against the backdrop of distant stars. The Drakthar convoy, composed of heavily armored freighters and escort ships, made its slow march toward the staging area, unaware that it was about to walk into a trap. The humans and Skr, though vastly different in tactics, had one thing in common. They were both hunters in their own right. While the Skr preferred direct assaults, humanity had learned the art of patience. They knew when to strike and when to vanish into the shadows. It was a different kind of power, one that relied on intelligence, misdirection, and speed. Jackson and her team watched intently as the convoy's lead freighter came into range. The Skr were ready to launch a barrage, but Jackson held up a hand. "Not yet," she said, watching the Drakthar closely. "Wait for it." With precise timing, Jackson ordered the first phase of the attack. A group of small, nimble human strike ships emerged from stealth, weaving through the convoy like shadows, targeting weak points in the Drakthar's defenses. The initial strike was small, but it was enough to send the convoy into disarray. The Drakthar scrambled to respond, their escorts scattering to engage the attackers, but the humans' hit-and-run tactics were too fast, too unpredictable. Trax watched in silence as the humans hit one ship after another with pinpoint accuracy, causing enough confusion to create chaos among the Drakthar. It was a sight he had never witnessed before, nothing like the slow, deliberate strikes of his own people, but it was working. "You see," Jackson said, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. "Now we disappear." The human ships vanished into the blackness of space, leaving the Drakthar scrambling in their wake. The Skr forces moved in, launching a sudden barrage of firepower to further disorient the convoy. It wasn't a full-scale assault. It was a surgical strike designed to do just enough damage to cripple the enemy without allowing them time to retaliate. The battle was short, brutal, and over before the Drakthar had a chance to regroup. The convoy was in shambles, its freighters drifting in space, their escorts in retreat. But the human and Skr forces had already slipped away, fading into the void. As Jackson stood on the bridge, watching the Drakthar ships retreat in disarray, a small victorious smile crossed her face. They had done it. They had struck the Drakthar and gotten away with minimal casualties. But more importantly, they had shaken the Drakthar's confidence. It was the first sign that the Drakthar could be disrupted, caught off guard. "Mission accomplished," Jackson said, her voice low but filled with triumph. Tarax stepped forward, his gaze now full of quiet respect. This was unlike anything I've ever seen. The Drakthar are not accustomed to this kind of warfare. Jackson nodded. That's the idea. Now they'll think twice before making their next move. As the human and Skir fleets pulled back into the shadows, ready to disappear until the next phase of their plan, there was no time to revel in victory. The Drakthar would learn from their mistakes, adapt, and return with even more ferocity. Jackson knew they couldn't rest for long. The war was far from over. But for now, humanity and the Skir had won a small victory, one that would not only impact the war, but also set the tone for the future of their fragile alliance. They were not just surviving, they were beginning to fight back. And that was only the beginning. The victory over the Drakthar convoy had sent a ripple through the galaxy. For the first time in years, the Skir had tasted success. Their warriors, hardened by centuries of domination, had been humbled by a new form of warfare, one that relied on speed, precision, and the unpredictability of human tactics. The alliance between the Skir and humanity, though still fragile, was now a beacon of hope. But the hard truth was that the war was far from over, and there was more to fear than just the Drakthar. Back aboard Endurance, Captain Olivia Jackson stood in her ready room, her eyes fixed on the map of the galaxy before her. She had been studying the aftermath of their operation, analyzing every decision, every moment that had led to the success of the mission. The Drakthar had retreated, this time, but Jackson knew they would adapt quickly, and the next engagement would be far more brutal. "Captain," came the voice of Lieutenant Torres, "we've received a message from Skir Command." Jackson straightened, curiosity peaking. "Patch it through." The screen flickered to life, revealing Tarax, his stern expression giving little away. But the slight tension in his posture suggested something wasn't right. He had seen the results of the mission, but there was an undercurrent of doubt in his words now. "Captain Jackson," Tarax began, his voice low, "there is something you must understand about our people. While we appreciate your unconventional approach, the Skir are not accustomed to these methods. I fear that our warriors will not continue to fight under these circumstances." Jackson's brow furrowed. "What are you saying, Tarax? Are you pulling your forces back?" "I am not pulling back," Tarax hesitated. "But we have our traditions. Our warriors are accustomed to victory through overwhelming force and discipline. This style of warfare, so chaotic, is unsettling to many. They question if we have truly won, or if we have simply been lucky." Jackson leaned forward, her tone firm. "You're telling me that after all of this, the first victory in years, you're going to let pride and tradition stand in the way?" Tarax's piercing eyes met hers, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something more than the calculating tactician. "It is not pride, Captain. It is survival. The Skir have lost too much to simply let go of what has always worked for us. We cannot simply follow your methods without consequence. There are those in my command who see this as weakness." Jackson felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. This wasn't just a military concern. It was cultural. The Skir had built an empire on dominance and fear, and for them, to embrace human tactics, disruptive, messy, unpredictable, was a deep challenge to everything they stood for. "So what, you're going to abandon the plan?" Jackson's voice hardened. "After all we've been through, this is our best shot. If you let your warriors stand down now, you're throwing away everything we fought for." Tarax's expression remained unreadable, but Jackson could see the storm behind his gaze. "I am doing what I can, but I cannot control every mind in my fleet." Before Jackson could respond, there was a sudden, urgent knock on the door. It slid open, and Commander Vorn, the Skir strategist who had been assigned to assist Earth's military, entered the room. He was a sharp-eyed, wiry individual, a tactician in every sense of the word. "Captain Jackson, we've just intercepted a Drakthar signal. They're preparing a counteroffensive, and they know about our last strike. The Skar are still divided. The Drakthar are moving faster than we anticipated." Jackson turned back to the screen, her frustration mounting. The situation was unraveling. The alliance, still in its infancy, was fragile, and the one thing they had achieved, momentum, was slipping through their fingers. "I'll have to convince them, won't I?" Jackson said, her voice laced with determination. "You may have no choice," Vorn replied. "The Drakthar are not ones to take failure lightly, and if they sense weakness in your alliance, they will exploit it." The message was clear. The clock was ticking. Jackson couldn't afford to waste any more time. The Skar needed to commit, or humanity's fragile hope for victory would slip away. It wasn't just about military strategy anymore. It was about holding this tenuous alliance together in the face of fear, doubt, and tradition. "I'm going to speak to Tarax," Jackson said, her decision made. "This alliance is going to work, or we're going to make it work, even if it kills us." As she cut off the transmission, the weight of the task ahead settled heavily on her shoulders. The galaxy was burning. The Drakthar were closing in. And if the Skar couldn't get past their pride and embrace the new way of fighting, all would be lost. Captain Olivia Jackson stood before the large bay windows of Endurance, staring out at the abyss of space. The stars seemed so distant now, so cold. The weight of the last few days pressed down on her chest. The alliance with the Skar was on the brink of collapse, and the Drakthar were gathering their strength. The tenuous victory they had achieved was slipping away with every passing hour. Her mind raced through the possibilities. If the Skar refused to fully commit, if they faltered now, it wouldn't just be the loss of a single battle. It would be the death of their chances to turn the tide of the war. She needed Tarax to understand the gravity of this. She needed him to see that their survival depended on a new way of fighting, one that didn't just rely on sheer power. The chime of her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Commander Vorn stepped inside, his face grim. "Captain, we've received word from Skar Command. It's not good." "Let me guess," Jackson replied, her voice tight with frustration. "They're pulling back." Vorn shook his head. "Not exactly. It's worse. Some of the Skar warlords are questioning whether they should continue following Tarax at all. There's talk of a coup. A faction is pushing to abandon the alliance with humanity, saying it weakens their honor." Jackson's stomach twisted. She'd known it wouldn't be easy. The Skar were built on centuries of imperial dominance, and the idea of relying on another species, let alone a species they had long regarded as primitive, was anathema to them. But to hear the words so clearly, to know that their entire alliance was on the verge of shattering, it was almost more than she could bear. "What are the odds they'll succeed?" she asked, her voice low. "High," Vorn admitted. "The warlords are powerful, and Tarax's position is fragile. The pressure is mounting." Jackson sighed, rubbing her temples. If the Skar fractured now, humanity would be forced to stand alone. The Drakthar were too formidable for that. A full-scale war was coming, and without the Skar's support, Earth would have no hope of surviving it. "Is there any way to turn this around?" Jackson asked, more to herself than to Vorn. "I'm not sure," Vorn replied quietly. "Tarax is struggling to keep control, but it might be too late. The Skar are too proud, too set in their ways, and we both know how that ends when the Drakthar make their move." The weight of the situation was suffocating. Jackson knew that if she didn't act fast, everything would unravel. She had one last chance to save this fragile alliance, and it had to be now. "I'm going to speak to Tarax," she said decisively. "If he's going to lead them, he needs to understand what's at stake. We can't afford to lose them now." A few hours later, Jackson found herself on the bridge of the Skar flagship, Kivorek. The air was thick with tension as she strode into the command center. Tarax stood at the helm, his dark eyes cold but unyielding. "Captain Jackson." Tarax greeted her, his tone curt. "What is it?" "You've heard the reports," she said, her voice sharp. "About the dissent among your people. The coup talk. The fractures in your fleet." Tarax didn't respond immediately, his gaze flickering toward the map of the galaxy projected before them. The Scare were facing collapse, not from the Drakthar, but from within. Jackson could see it in his eyes, the struggle between his pride and the brutal reality of the situation. "We cannot afford to lose this war, Tarax," Jackson said, stepping closer. "You know that. Your people have fought for generations to build an empire, to carve out a place in this galaxy. But you've lost so much already. If you let your warriors walk away from this alliance now, everything you fought for will be gone. The Drakthar will wipe you out." Tarax turned, his massive form casting a long shadow. "You do not understand, Captain. We are the Sikar. We are not meant to bow to others. Your tactics, your unpredictability, are beneath us. My people will not follow a path they believe dishonors them." Jackson stood her ground. "Then you will die, Tarax. All of you. Every last one of your people will be wiped out. The Drakthar won't spare anyone who shows weakness. This war isn't about honor. It's about survival. And if you don't change your ways now, you won't have a people left to lead." Tarax's jaw clenched. The silence between them stretched long, thick with the weight of his internal conflict. "You speak of survival as though it were a lesser goal than honor," Tarax said, his voice low. "But I have seen my people fall, Captain. I have seen them driven to the brink. And now I face a choice. Do I lead them down a path that will shatter everything we have built, or do I return to what we know?" Jackson took a deep breath, fighting the wave of frustration and fear rising in her chest. "You have to lead them, Tarax. You have to show them that honor isn't about pride. It's about saving what's left of your people. It's about adapting." The Shkar High Commander's gaze softened, just slightly. Perhaps you are right." The conversation hung there, a fragile thread between them. Jackson had no illusions. The battle for the Shkar's soul wasn't over. But this was the moment, the tipping point where the fate of the galaxy might shift, and humanity's survival rested on a knife's edge. The silence that followed Jackson's plea seemed to stretch endlessly, the weight of the galaxy's future pressing on every word. Tarax stood motionless, his thoughts clearly churning. He had led his people through countless wars, each victory carved through brute force and the strictest of discipline. But now, for the first time, the cost of survival demanded that he abandon those very tenets. The thought was a bitter pill, one that threatened to choke him. Captain Jackson wasn't one to wait for long-winded deliberation. Her instincts told her that now was the moment to press her advantage. Time was running out, and every passing second felt like a countdown to disaster. "Tarax," she said softly, stepping closer to him. "You're not the only one who's had to sacrifice. Humanity, our people, are on the verge of extinction. But we've learned, and we've adapted. If we're going to fight, we fight together. But you have to let go of this pride before it costs you everything." The Scare Commander's eyes narrowed, his imposing presence filling the room. "You still do not understand. I have already sacrificed much, too much. My people, my warriors, they look to me for leadership. If I falter, if I bow to you and your chaos, they will see me as weak." "I'm not asking you to bow," Jackson replied, her voice firm. "I'm asking you to lead. Real leaders know when to change direction. They know when to fight with their minds, not just their strength." Tarax's fists clenched at his sides, his entire form a monument of restraint. "And you think your way will save us?" "I think it will give you a chance," Jackson said, her eyes meeting his. "The Drakthar are ruthless. They'll wipe you out, but only if you fight them the way you've always fought. Head on. If you want to survive, you need to disrupt them. You need to show them that you're unpredictable, like we are." The commander's gaze softened for a moment, an inkling of understanding passing between them. And if this fails, if my people refuse to follow, then we'll make our stand, and we'll fight, Jackson said. But I'm not giving up on you, Tarax. I'm not giving up on your people. A long moment passed as the two stared at each other, their respective positions clear. The Eskir leader turned away, his face etched with the lines of centuries of warfare. You are right, Captain Jackson. I cannot let my people fall because of my pride. For them, for our survival, I will take this chance. Jackson exhaled, the tension in her chest easing slightly. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a breakthrough. This scare had agreed to try, to fight differently. But the real test would come when they faced the Drakthar again. They needed to see results, and soon. The next few days passed in a blur of planning and strategizing. Jackson and Tarax held frequent meetings, working to integrate their forces and refine the tactics. The Sukar, though resistant at first, began to see the wisdom in the human approach. Small victories like the Drakthar convoy strike were proof that their traditional methods, while powerful, were no longer enough. The Drakthar's growing adaptability and their own unpredictable nature required something else, something outside this scare way of war. As the scare warriors began to adjust, Jackson could feel a shift in the air. It wasn't just the military strategies that were changing. There was a subtle shift in the attitudes of the scare officers, a recognition that perhaps they had underestimated humanity's worth. Still, the stakes were high. Tarax was holding on to his leadership by a thread, and the warlords who had questioned him were still watching. Even now, they were planning their next move. But there was little time to dwell on politics. The Drakthar were moving faster than anyone had expected. Their next strike was imminent, and it would be the biggest battle yet. Jackson stood on the Bridge of Endurance once more, her eyes trained on the flashing lights of the incoming fleet. The Sivkar had united under Tarax's command, and their forces were now coordinated with the humans' hit-and-run tactics. It was time for the first real test of their new alliance. The Drakthar fleet was massive, a sea of blackened warships that seemed to blot out the stars. The moment had arrived. Jackson felt the familiar rush of adrenaline course through her. But this time, it wasn't just about her crew or her ship. It was about every life that had been sacrificed, every moment of doubt that had been conquered. The alliance wasn't just a strategy. It was humanity's best chance at survival. Captain, Lieutenant Torres said, breaking through her thoughts. The scare are in position. We're ready to engage. The battle loomed like a dark storm on the horizon. The Eskar and humanity stood united, their ships poised for action, their warriors ready to face the Drakthar in what would be their largest confrontation to date. The combined forces were not without their tensions. Humanity's tactics of speed, agility, and misdirection still rubbed against the scare's tradition of overwhelming might and force. But for the first time, they shared a single objective: survival. Captain Olivia Jackson stood at the front of the Bridge of Endurance, her eyes scanning the strategic map of the battlefield. The Drakthar fleet was massive. Dozens of dreadnoughts, hundreds of frigates and destroyers, an army built for a head-on clash. But what the Drakthar didn't understand was that this time, they weren't facing a straightforward fight. Humanity's unpredictable style would be their greatest weapon. Captain, the scare are in position. Lieutenant Torres called out. We're ready to proceed with the plan. Jackson's gaze locked onto the tactical display. She could feel the weight of the moment in her bones, but there was no time for hesitation. The plan had been set in motion for weeks, and this was their moment to either prove themselves or die trying. Make sure everyone's clear on their roles, she ordered. We're hitting them fast, hitting them hard, and then pulling back. We strike where they're weakest, where they expect us the least. No delays, no mistakes. Vorn, the scare strategist who had reluctantly agreed to work alongside humanity, leaned over from his post. The Drakthar are known for their resilience. If they begin to adapt to our tactics, we'll need to shift immediately. They won't fall for the same trick twice. We'll keep them guessing, Jackson said, determination cutting through her words like steel. The moment they think they have us cornered, we'll pull out. Our greatest weapon isn't firepower. It's our ability to make them question everything they know. Trax's voice boomed from the comms, his words cutting through the tension on the bridge. Captain Jackson, we are ready. Your humans will follow the plan, but you must understand. If we fail, my warriors will not fight again. There can be no retreat. Our survival hinges on this battle. Jackson turned toward the screen, locking eyes with Trax's image. I understand. But know this, if we fail, it won't be because of the plan. It will be because we didn't trust each other. And that will not happen. Trax's gaze softened for a moment, the battle-worn leader recognizing the strength in her words. This scare had been forged in battle, but they had never faced an enemy like this, one that fought with more than just sheer force. The battlefield erupted into chaos as the two fleets collided. The Drakthar surged forward, their massive warships cutting through the void like living beasts of war. The Iskar responded with brutal, calculated force, their dreadnoughts opening fire in deadly precision, while humanity's strike ships darted in and out of the fray, striking the Drakthar's weaker points before vanishing into the darkness. For a moment, it seemed like they were winning. The Drakthar were disoriented, unable to respond to the unpredictability of the assault. But then, as Jackson had feared, the Drakthar adapted. They began to anticipate the hit-and-run tactics, deploying squadrons of fighters to track the smaller, faster human ships. Shift to Phase 2. Jackson barked, her heart racing. Share, break their lines. Humanity, focus on the command ship. We'll hit them where it hurts. The battle took on a new intensity as the Sefkar, under Trax's leadership, pressed forward with more aggression, drawing the Drakthar's attention. Meanwhile, humanity's forces targeted the Drakthar flagship, the heart of their command structure. The Drakthar responded with a ferocity they hadn't shown before, deploying waves of reinforcements to protect their command vessel. Jackson's pulse quickened. If they didn't act now, they would be overrun. She turned to Vorn. What's their weak point? The command vessel is heavily armored, but there are blind spots in its shields, right under the dorsal ridge. Vorn replied quickly. It's a risky strike, but it's our best shot. Then we make it, Jackson said without hesitation. Prepare all remaining strike ships. We're going in. With this scare providing a diversion, the human ships swarmed toward the Drakthar flagship, ducking and weaving through the chaos of exploding debris and enemy fire. Jackson's breath held as the first wave of ships dove toward the weak spot Vorn had identified. The shields shimmered under the intense fire, faltering for a split second, just enough for the human ships to make their move. Now, Jackson shouted. The remaining strike ships unleashed their payloads, precision missiles aimed directly at the vulnerable spot. The explosion that followed lit up the void like a miniature star. The Drakthar flagship shuddered, its systems flickering, and for the first time in the battle, the Drakthar faltered. Direct hit, Torres called out. Their flagship is going down. The remaining Drakthar forces, disorganized and leaderless, began to crumble. The Iskar pressed their advantage, their warriors roaring into the fray with renewed ferocity. Humanity's strike ships pulled back, leaving the Drakthar with nothing but chaos and confusion in their wake. As the battlefield began to quiet, Captain Jackson allowed herself a breath of relief. The battle had been brutal, but they had done it. The Drakthar had been shattered, at least for now. Trax's voice echoed across the comms, a rare note of pride in his deep voice. You were right, Captain. This battle, it was not won by force alone. It was won by unpredictability, by unity. Jackson's lips curled into a tired but triumphant smile. It was won because we didn't give up on each other.